Our goal for this session are a detailed study of the organs that form the female reproductive system along with mammary glands. Except for mammary glands, all other organs are present in the pelvic region. We'll also try to cover the oogenesis or the formation of ovum. Fallopian tubes, uterus and vagina collectively form the accessory ducts. These organs, along with mammary glands, are together involved in the process of reproduction, which includes the following. Now, what you see here are the organs of female reproductive system. This includes a pair of ovaries, one on each side, a pair of oviducts, also known as fallopian tubes, uterus, cervix, also known as the birth canal. So these are the organs of female reproductive system. Let's start with ovary. Ovaries are the primary female sex organs. They produce female gametes or the ovum and several steroid hormones, also known as the ovarian hormones. These are some of the main characteristics of ovaries. Each ovary is covered by a thin germinal epithelium. The epithelium surrounds the stroma that is divided into two zones, the outer cortex and the inner medulla. These two together form the stroma. Now, inside the medulla are the developing ovum, here known as the follicles in different stages of development. So within the ovary there is the outer cortex, the inner medulla, and in the medulla you can see the stages of oogenesis in form of follicles. The oviduct or the fallopian tube. This is made up of three parts: infundibulum, ampulla and isthmus. The infundibulum is the part close to the ovary. It is funnel shaped and the ends of infundibulum have finger-like projections. These are known as fimbriae. Fimbriae help in collection of ovum after ovulation. Then the ampulla. Infundibulum leads to a wider ampulla. Isthmus. The ampulla leads the last part of oviduct, which has a narrow lumen, and this leads into the uterus. This is ciliated. Ampulla is the site of fertilization. The uterus or the womb. It is single, inverted, pear-shaped, muscular and highly vascular, and it is supported by ligaments attached to the pelvic wall. Now, this is formed of three parts. There is the fundus, the uterine fundus, which is the upper dense part. Then the uterine cavity or the body or corpus. This is the middle and the main part. The wall of uterus in this region is made of three layers. This we'll do later. The last part is the cervix, that is the lower narrow part. Uterus open into the vagina through cervix. The cavity of cervix is known as cervical canal, which along with vagina forms the birth canal. Now the wall of uterus, this has three layers. The outermost is the perimetrium. It is thin and membranous and it forms the outer envelope. The middle layer is the myometrium. It is formed of layers of smooth muscles. This layer helps in childbirth by undergoing strong contractions. The innermost layer is the endometrium. This is a glandular layer that undergoes changes during menstrual cycle. We'll be doing this in the next video. It is the site of implantation and fetal growth during pregnancy. Placenta is also formed here in the endometrium. Now, this is a comparative study of the three walls of uterus. Now, mammary gland is a characteristic feature of mammals. These are paired structures containing glandular tissues and fats. The glandular tissue with the secretory cells is divided into 15 to 20 mammary lobes. Each of these lobes contains clusters of cells known as alveoli. These alveoli are important because these are the cells that secrete milk, and this milk is stored in the lumen of alveoli. These alveoli open into mammary tubules. The mammary tubules join to collectively form the mammary duct. Mammary ducts join to form the mammary ampulla, and the mammary ampulla is connected to lactiferous duct through which milk is secreted out. So you have mammary lobes which have alveoli that secrete milk. Alveoli lead into mammary tubules, then mammary duct, mammary ampulla, and finally the lactiferous duct. Now we start with the process of oogenesis. This is the formation of the haploid female gamete called the ova or singular ovum from the diploid egg mother cell or the oogonia of ovary. Now, when does oogenesis takes place? Unlike in males, in females, the oogenesis begins when the female fetus is in its mother's womb. That is, when the fetus is developing inside the uterus of its mother. When organ formation begins in a female fetus, the ovary is also formed. At this stage, millions of gamete mother cells are formed within each fetal ovary, and then no more are formed or added after birth. So, oogenesis in human females is initiated during embryonic development stage. In males, if you recall, spermatogenesis begins at puberty. Now, oogenesis comprises of three stages, just like spermatogenesis: the multiplicative phase, the growth phase, and the maturation phase. Now first we'll start with the multiplicative phase. We studied that ovary has germinal epithelium on the outside. During multiplicative phase, certain primary germ cells of the germinal epithelium of ovary undergo rapid mitotic division to form a group of egg mother cells or the oogonia. This is to increase the number of oogonia formed. Now, oogonia starts meiosis 1, but the division stops at prophase 1. This stage is known as the primary oocyte. Now, some very important changes take place at this stage. The primary oocyte becomes surrounded by a layer of granulosa cell and is now known as the primary follicle. You have to remember two very important things. This process is taking place in fetal ovary, and since the number of oogonia was in millions, millions of such primary oocytes are formed in the fetal ovary. These primary follicles with primary oocyte at prophase 1 remain till puberty. By puberty, out of these millions of primary follicles, only 60 to 80,000 survive, the remaining degenerate. Next, each primary follicle then gets surrounded by more layers of granulosa and a theca forming the secondary follicle. each of these primary follicles gets surrounded by more layers of granulosa. A theca is formed and it forms the secondary follicle. Secondary follicle then develops a fluid-filled antral cavity called the antrum, and this now is termed as the tertiary follicle. The theca layer gets organized into inner theca and outer theca, that is theca externa and theca interna. Up till this stage, the development occurs before the release of ovule or ovulation. Inside this tertiary follicle, there is still the primary oocyte with the development arrested at prophase 1. Now the maturation phase is just before ovulation, that is the release of ovary. At this stage, the primary oocyte within the tertiary follicle will grow in size and the first meiotic division is completed. This is an unequal division resulting in a secondary oocyte which is large and a polar body. The secondary oocyte retains bulk of the nutrient-rich cytoplasm of primary oocyte. This completes the first meiotic division. What happens to the first polar body is unclear right now, but it definitely does not divide or in any way participate in ovum formation. At this stage, the tertiary follicle further changes into the Graafian follicle. The secondary oocyte, which is formed inside the tertiary follicle, this also changes and it forms a new membrane known as zona pellucida which surrounds it. The Graafian follicle now ruptures to release this secondary oocyte, also known as the ovum, from the ovary by the process which is known as ovulation. What is left of the Graafian follicle after release of ovum is known as corpus luteum. All these stages occur together inside an ovary. That is, different ovum in different stages are present simultaneously in an ovary and are seen here in the diagram. You have primary follicle with primary oocyte. Primary follicle develops into secondary and then into tertiary follicle. Just before ovulation in the ovum, which is to be released, meiosis 1 occurs, forming the secondary oocyte and the first polar body. Next, tertiary follicle develops into the Graafian follicle. The ovum is released, leaving the empty Graafian follicle. The empty Graafian follicle is corpus luteum. You must remember that till ovulation only meiosis 1 has taken place. Meiosis 2 is still not started. Now the structure of ovum. You just saw that the oogenesis process starts in the fetal embryo, but a part of oogenesis process at the age of puberty is due to significant increase in the secretion of gonadotrophin releasing hormone, GnRH. This is a hypothalamic hormone. Due to high levels of GnRH, it acts on the anterior pituitary gland, and this anterior pituitary gland releases two hormones. follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. The luteinizing hormone causes ovulation from the Graafian follicle, that is release of ovum. Simultaneously, the remaining part of Graafian follicle forms corpus luteum, and this corpus luteum secretes progesterone. The second hormone that is stimulated as a result of anterior pituitary gland is follicle stimulating hormone. This induces follicle development, that is development of primary to secondary to tertiary and then to Graafian follicle. Simultaneously, the maturation of ovum and the secretion of estrogen. These are some of the important hormones of female reproductive system. Estrogen, which controls growth and development of secondary sexual organs. Progesterone, it prepares uterus for implantation of fertilized ovum or the zygote, prevents ovulation during pregnancy and development of fetus during pregnancy. Then there is relaxin, which is released at the end of pregnancy, and it broadens pelvis for childbirth. With this, we come to the end of this session. Here are some questions for your practice.